it is very hard for archaeologists to explain how that was done using purely leverage and mechanical advantage. You can say, oh, perhaps they built a ramp and hauled the stones up the ramp.
We've been told the pyramids were tombs built by ancient Egyptians with copper tools and brute labor. But what if that story's only half the truth? Or worse, completely wrong? Graham Hancock believes we've been looking at the greatest mystery in human history all wrong. He says he's found the real builders of the pyramids, and he's got the evidence to prove it. Buckle up. This is not your history teacher's Egypt. The Graham Hancock. If you've ever gone down a late-night YouTube rabbit hole or flipped through Netflix looking for something mysterious, you've probably come across Graham Hancock. He's not a dusty professor or a guy with 10 degrees in archaeology. In fact, that's exactly what makes him so interesting and controversial. Hancock is a British journalist by trade, not an academic archaeologist. He made his name covering current affairs and international politics, writing for outlets like The Economist and The Times. But in the 90s, he took a hard left turn into something much older: ancient civilizations, forgotten histories, and the mysteries that traditional archaeology tends to avoid like the plague. His breakout book, Fingerprints of the Gods, published in 1995, flipped the script on everything we thought we knew about early human history. The core idea? That there was a highly advanced civilization that predated all known ancient cultures, and that this civilization passed down its knowledge after being wiped out by a cataclysm. According to Hancock, the pyramids are part of that inheritance. Since then, he's doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down on that message. Books like Magicians of the Gods, America Before, and the Netflix docuseries Ancient Apocalypse have only fueled his popularity and his critics' fury. Because here's the thing, Hancock doesn't just suggest that we might be missing something. He flat out accuses the academic world of willful ignorance. He believes archaeologists have become the gatekeepers of a narrow, rigid narrative that leaves no room for curiosity, alternative views, or worst of all, data that doesn't fit the timeline. But whether you see him as a visionary or a pseudo-scientific troublemaker, Hancock has tapped into something real. The sense that the official story doesn't quite add up. He's asking the questions a lot of people secretly wonder, but are too afraid or unqualified to ask out loud. And his biggest, boldest question is this: who really built the pyramids? Let's get into it. The orthodox pyramid story and why Hancock isn't buying it. Let's start with the version you probably learned in school. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2560 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, is said to have been constructed as a tomb over the course of 20 years by tens of thousands of workers. Using copper tools, sledges, ropes, and raw manpower, these workers supposedly erected the largest and most precise stone structure in human history. According to mainstream archaeologists, it was an extraordinary feat, but one that falls within the capabilities of a determined Bronze Age civilization. Graham Hancock doesn't buy it. Not even a little. To him, this story isn't just unlikely, it's fundamentally flawed. He argues that we've been spoon-fed a version of history that crumbles the moment you look at it with fresh eyes. For starters, the scale alone is insane. The Great Pyramid is made up of approximately 2,300,000 limestone and granite blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons. Many of the granite blocks used in the internal chambers were transported from Aswan, more than 500 miles away. How exactly were they moved without wheels or iron tools? Egyptologists hand-wave this part with vague references to sledges, barges, and elbow grease. But Hancock, and frankly, a lot of curious minds, find that explanation more magical than mechanical. Then there's the issue of time. If the pyramid was built in just 20 years, the builders would have needed to place a block every 2 to 3 minutes, 24 hours a day, without stopping, without errors, and without delays. Think about that. No weekends, no weather problems, no supply shortages, just relentless machine-like precision from a civilization that hadn't even discovered the wheel. For Hancock, this defies logic. He's not saying the ancient Egyptians weren't brilliant engineers. He's saying this version of the story makes it seem like they were supernatural. What really sets off alarm bells for Hancock is the total lack of plans or schematics. You'd think that a project of this magnitude, the biggest building ever attempted in the ancient world, would come with some kind of architectural drawings, instructions, or even rough outlines. But we have none. Ancient Egyptians left behind receipts for grain, records of tax payments, religious texts by the thousands, but no construction plans for the pyramids. That's a red flag for Hancock. It's as if the pyramid just appeared, already perfect, as if handed down, not built up. And let's not forget the tools. According to mainstream theory, the builders used copper chisels to cut and shape granite, one of the hardest materials on Earth. Hancock points out, rightly, that this doesn't make much sense. Copper is soft, granite is not. Even modern-day stonemasons with diamond-tipped tools struggle to work with granite, at the level of precision seen inside the Great Pyramid. How were the ancient Egyptians, armed with primitive tools, able to carve out smooth internal chambers with perfectly flat surfaces and laser-like accuracy? No one has a satisfying answer, but Hancock has plenty of uncomfortable questions. Another oddity: the interior of the pyramid is completely bare. Most Egyptian tombs, even those belonging to minor officials, are covered in hieroglyphics, religious art, and intricate carvings. But the Great Pyramid? Nothing. No decoration, no inscriptions, no grand claims of ownership. Just massive, cold, empty stone. For what was supposedly a royal tomb, it's suspiciously minimalist. Hancock argues that this doesn't match the culture or the practices of the time. If this was really Khufu's final resting place, where's the celebration of his legacy? The silence inside the pyramid is, in a way, louder than any inscription could be. Then there's the alignment. The Great Pyramid is oriented with near-perfect accuracy to true north, to within 3/60 of a degree. It's aligned more precisely than even some modern structures. Without GPS, lasers, or telescopes, how did ancient builders pull this off? Hancock sees this as yet another sign that the pyramid's architects were working with knowledge far beyond what should have been available in 2500 BCE. Whether through astronomical observation or inherited wisdom from an earlier culture, someone knew exactly what they were doing, and it wasn't a fluke. Taken together, the scale, the logistics, the lack of plans, the tool conundrum, the undecorated interior, and the precise alignment, Hancock believes the mainstream story doesn't just have holes, it's built on quicksand. He argues that the traditional narrative doesn't explain how or why the pyramids were built with such complexity. And more importantly, it ignores compelling evidence that the pyramids may not be products of the Old Kingdom at all, but relics of a forgotten world. If the Egyptians didn't build the pyramids from scratch using copper tools and brute force, who did? Or perhaps the better question is when? The case for a much older civilization. This is where things get really interesting and controversial. According to Graham Hancock, the pyramids might not be 4,500 years old at all. In fact, he suggests they could be much, much older, built not by the Old Kingdom Egyptians, but by a forgotten civilization that existed long before history officially began. A civilization with advanced knowledge, high-level engineering skills, and possibly even global reach. Sounds wild, right? But Hancock isn't just pulling this out of thin air. He's pulling it from geology, astronomy, and archaeology's own blind spots. Let's start with the geological argument, which is often overlooked in debates about ancient history. Hancock draws heavily on the work of Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University who rocked the academic world in the 90s with his analysis of the Great Sphinx. Schock observed deep vertical erosion patterns on the body of the Sphinx, the kind typically caused by heavy rainfall, not desert winds. Here's the problem. The Giza Plateau has been arid for the last 5,000 years. The kind of rain erosion seen on the Sphinx would have required sustained wet weather, likely before 10,000 BCE, during a time when the Sahara was still lush and green. That would place the Sphinx, and potentially the pyramids, thousands of years older than the textbooks say. Hancock takes this further by pointing out that if the Sphinx is older, then the entire Giza complex might be part of a much earlier timeline. Maybe the Old Kingdom pharaohs didn't build the pyramids, maybe they just inherited them. They could have repurposed these ancient structures, added their own finishing touches, and taken credit for monuments that had already stood for millennia. After all, ancient Egyptians were known for renovating and re-inscribing older temples. Why not do the same with the pyramids? But geology is just one piece of the puzzle. Hancock also dives deep into astronomy, and here's where things start to sound like science fiction, until you realize how precise the alignments really are. The three pyramids at Giza aren't randomly placed. Their layout matches the three stars in Orion's belt, part of a constellation that played a major role in ancient Egyptian mythology. More specifically, the alignment works best not for 2500 BCE, the accepted date of construction, but for around 10,500 BCE, when Orion's belt would have lined up perfectly with the layout on the ground. This theory, known as the Orion correlation theory, was introduced by Robert Bauval and expanded by Hancock. It suggests that the Giza pyramids were built, or at least designed, to mirror the stars at a time far earlier than Egyptian civilization supposedly existed. Skeptics argue that this is cherry-picking, that you can make anything line up with stars if you try hard enough. But Hancock counters that the alignments are too precise to be coincidental. Not just at Giza, but at other ancient sites around the world, from Stonehenge to Angkor Wat, similar astronomical connections pop up. These weren't just ancient monuments, they were celestial maps, encoded with knowledge of the skies. And if early civilizations were capable of that kind of star mapping, then maybe we've underestimated just how advanced they really were. Then there's the site that changed everything, Göbekli Tepe, in modern-day Turkey, discovered in the 90s and dated to at least 9,600 BCE. It's now the oldest known megalithic site in the world, older than Stonehenge, the pyramids, and anything else we thought ancient humans could build. What's crazy about Göbekli Tepe is not just its age, but its sophistication. Massive carved stone pillars, astronomical alignments, symbolic carvings, all from a time when humans were supposedly just hunter-gatherers. There's no evidence of agriculture, no cities, no writing, and yet, somehow, there was monumental architecture. To Hancock, this was the smoking gun. Göbekli Tepe proves that there was complex culture and intelligence in deep prehistory, long before the official start of civilization. And if such a culture could exist in one part of the world, who's to say it didn't exist elsewhere? What if the story of human history doesn't start in Sumer or Egypt, but much earlier, with a civilization that was later wiped out, perhaps by a cataclysm like the end of the last ice age? This leads us to one of Hancock's core arguments, that around 12,800 years ago, Earth was hit by a major disaster, possibly the impact of a fragmented comet, an event known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. This sudden climatic shift caused massive flooding, temperature swings, and likely the collapse of any advanced societies that existed at the time. If true, it would explain why so much of ancient history appears to begin suddenly around 3000 BCE, because everything before that was lost. Only fragments remained. Only the strongest structures survived. And the pyramids? They may be those survivors. It's a compelling narrative, not because it's full of aliens and ancient astronauts. Hancock actually rejects those ideas, but because it forces us to rethink what ancient really means. Maybe humans have risen and fallen more than once. Maybe the story of civilization is not linear, but cyclical, with knowledge gained, lost, and slowly rediscovered. To many, Hancock's ideas are too speculative. But to a growing number of open-minded researchers and curious laypeople, they're not just possible, they're plausible. After all, if Göbekli Tepe existed before agriculture, why not other lost cities? Why not other unknown builders? And if that's the case, then maybe the pyramids aren't just tombs or temples or tourist attractions. Maybe they're messages from a lost world, built to last and waiting to be decoded. Technology they shouldn't have had. This is where things go from curious to almost unbelievable. If you accept, even for a moment, that the pyramids or parts of them might be older than we've been told, the next question is obvious. How were they built? Because even if you ignore the age debate entirely, there's something undeniably strange about the level of engineering and technology that went into these ancient structures. According to Graham Hancock and others who share his skepticism, the real mystery isn't just who built them, it's how. Start with the stonework. Walk into the Great Pyramid's internal chambers, or look at any number of ancient megalithic sites around the world, and you'll see something that looks oddly modern. We're talking about perfectly straight lines, razor-thin joints, and polished granite surfaces that look like they were cut with machine tools. In the king's chamber, massive granite blocks were stacked with such precision that you can barely fit a razor blade between them. These aren't just rough-cut boulders tossed together, they're precisely shaped and expertly placed. And yet, the official explanation is that this was done with copper chisels and pounding stones. Really? To test that theory, some modern researchers and stonemasons have actually tried to replicate the process. The results? Disappointing at best. Carving granite with copper tools is not only painfully slow, it's virtually impossible to achieve the kind of smooth, flat, polished surfaces we see inside the pyramid. And then there's the sheer size of some of the blocks. At sites like Baalbek in Lebanon, you've got single stones weighing over 1,000 tons. The largest known cut stone block in the world, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman, sits in a quarry at Baalbek, and no one knows how they intended to move it. No modern crane could lift it. So how did ancient people do it? Hancock argues that we're either grossly underestimating their capabilities or we're missing a lost technology. And this isn't just about Egypt. Sites all around the world show signs of what looks like advanced engineering knowledge. In Peru, at Sacsayhuaman, you've got gigantic stone walls with interlocking blocks, carved in irregular shapes, fit together without mortar, and still standing after centuries of earthquakes. These stones don't just fit together, they lock into place like a jigsaw puzzle, complete with internal angles, curves, and even shock-absorbing designs. The craftsmanship is so advanced that modern engineers still argue over how it was done. And yet, the local story is that the Inca didn't build these walls, they found them. Hancock ties all this together by suggesting that what we're looking at across these ancient sites is evidence of a technological legacy, knowledge passed down from an earlier civilization that had a very different understanding of materials, energy, and possibly even the forces of nature. Some researchers have proposed that acoustic levitation, vibration-based cutting, or even the manipulation of magnetic fields might explain how ancient builders moved and shaped massive stones. That might sound like fringe science, and maybe it is, but the fact remains, no one can fully explain how these monuments were built using only the tools and methods assigned to their time period. What makes this even more compelling is that similar techniques and architectural styles appear in places that were supposedly disconnected. The precision stonework seen in Egypt is mirrored in Peru, Bolivia, and parts of Southeast Asia. Across continents and cultures, Separated by thousands of miles and allegedly thousands of years, you see the same mysterious fingerprint. Massive stones, perfect fits, inexplicable techniques. Hancock believes this is no coincidence. It's the echo of a global civilization, or at least a globally connected network of knowledge that existed before the known ancient empires. Of course, most mainstream scholars argue that this is all overblown. They attribute the similarities to parallel development, the idea that different cultures came up with similar solutions to similar problems independently. But again, Hancock pushes back. He says that while cultural parallels are possible, the precision, the scale, and the engineering knowledge involved are just too much to write off as primitive ingenuity, especially when modern tools and materials can barely replicate what ancient builders achieved using, what, copper? To skeptics, this sounds like pseudoscience. To believers, it's the key to an untold chapter of human history. And to everyone else, it's a rabbit hole that's almost impossible not to fall into. Because whether or not you accept the theories, one thing is certain. There's a growing list of unanswered questions that traditional archaeology just doesn't address in any satisfying way. So maybe we don't have to believe in space aliens or time travelers to explain the pyramids. Maybe we just need to admit that human history is a lot more mysterious and possibly a lot older and more advanced than we've been led to believe. And that brings us to the big one, the part where Hancock puts his cards on the table. He doesn't just ask questions. He says he's got the proof. Let's talk about that. Hancock's smoking guns, the proof he brings to the table. For someone often labeled a pseudoscientist, Graham Hancock is surprisingly obsessed with evidence. He doesn't just tell wild stories about lost civilizations and forgotten technologies, he brings receipts. And while they might not look like proof in the peer-reviewed academic sense, they're compelling enough to have sparked debate, doubt, and curiosity around the world. Hancock's critics say he's a master storyteller. His fans say he's the guy finally asking the right questions. Either way, his arsenal of anomalies, his smoking guns, deserves a serious look. First up, satellite imagery, LiDAR scans, and seismographic data. Hancock points out that traditional archaeology often focuses on what's visible above ground, while modern tech allows us to peer beneath the surface, using tools like ground-penetrating radar and LiDAR, which can strip away vegetation and reveal buried structures that have yet to be fully excavated or explained. Hancock suggests that these hidden structures could be far older than the visible pyramids themselves, possibly predating the pharaohs entirely. Then there's the underwater evidence, which might be the most mind-blowing of all. Off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, divers discovered what looks like a massive stone complex, a sort of submerged pyramid structure with steps, platforms, and carved features. Mainstream scientists still argue over whether it's man-made or a natural formation, but Hancock, who has personally dived the site, is convinced it's artificial. If true, that would make it at least 10,000 years old, dating it to a time when sea levels were much lower and Yonaguni was dry land. And Yonaguni isn't alone. There's also the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, a line of large flat stones underwater that some believe to be the remnants of an ancient roadway or breakwater. Again, mainstream archaeology shrugs, but Hancock sees these as possible remnants of coastal cities swallowed by rising seas after the last ice age, cities that aren't supposed to have existed. Next up, ancient maps that show too much. The most famous is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral who claimed he used even older source maps. What's strange about the Piri Reis map is that it seems to depict Antarctica's coastline without ice. According to geological studies, the last time Antarctica's coast was ice-free was around 6,000 to 12,000 years ago. How could a 16th century mapmaker know that unless someone much older mapped it first. Hancock argues that this, along with other ancient maps like the Orontius Phineus and Buache maps, suggests a forgotten global cartographic knowledge, preserved from a prehistoric culture that had explored much of the world long before the age of European empires. And then there's the mystery of anomalous artifacts, objects found out of place and out of time. Take the so-called Baghdad Battery, clay jars with copper and iron components that may have been used to generate electrical current in ancient Mesopotamia. Or the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device found in a shipwreck that functions like an analog computer, tracking planetary movements with stunning precision. While these aren't Egyptian in origin, Hancock includes them to show a larger point, that ancient people may have had technologies we've forgotten or can't yet recognize. He even cites controversial artifacts like precision-drilled granite cores found in Egypt, which show spiral patterns suggesting machine-assisted drilling. To Hancock, these are clues, overlooked or dismissed by mainstream scholars, but incredibly important if you're open to the idea of lost knowledge. But one of Hancock's strongest pieces of evidence isn't physical, it's cultural. Across dozens of ancient civilizations, there are myths of a great flood, of sky gods or sages arriving from the sea, of lost lands and advanced beings who brought knowledge of farming, astronomy, and building. These stories pop up in Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, India, Egypt, and Polynesia, and they often share eerily similar themes. To Hancock, this isn't just coincidence, it's memory, a fragmented, mythologized account of a global catastrophe that wiped out an earlier high civilization. Survivors, he believes, may have seeded their knowledge among the hunter-gatherers they encountered, which would explain the sudden appearance of advanced architecture and astronomy in supposedly primitive cultures. Of course, none of this is ironclad proof. Hancock admits that himself, but his point is this: if so many unrelated data points, underwater ruins, unexplained alignments, technological anomalies, ancient maps, flood myths, all point in the same direction, isn't that at least worth a second look? Isn't that enough to justify asking better questions? The pushback he gets from academia is intense, but Hancock argues that dogma has no place in science. If archaeology is really a discipline that seeks the truth about our past, then why are certain ideas off-limits? Why is the idea of a lost civilization so threatening? Why is alternative history treated like a dirty phrase, instead of a necessary challenge to stagnant theories? Whether you agree with him or not, Hancock is pushing the conversation forward. And if he's even halfway right, it means our understanding of human history, of our origin story, is due for a serious rewrite. So let's ask the obvious question now. If it wasn't the Egyptians, or at least not just the Egyptians, who built the pyramids, then who did? And what kind of civilization could have pulled it off? Of the past, based on scientific proof. And here comes this outsider, challenging it all with ideas of lost civilizations, cataclysmic floods, and ancient advanced tech. Even worse, he's charismatic and convincing, a real threat. It's not just about being right. It's about protecting the paradigm. Science is supposed to be self-correcting, embracing new data and challenges. But in ancient history, things move slowly. Once a theory is accepted, like the pyramids being tombs built by Khufu's workers, it becomes sacred. Changing it means rewriting textbooks and admitting long-standing errors, a tough pill to swallow. There's also fear of opening the floodgates to conspiracy theories, aliens, Atlantis, and crackpot ideas. Academics say they protect the field from pseudoscience, but Hancock argues this defensiveness goes too far. Instead of investigating his evidence, they dismiss him outright, labeling him a pseudo-archaeologist. Hancock keeps asking, why not dig deeper and test these claims? He's not demanding belief, just a fair look. Some younger researchers are opening the door, but top-level resistance remains strong. And then there's the cultural angle. We love a neat, linear story. Civilization starts in Mesopotamia, flows through Egypt and Greece, leads to Rome, and ends with us. It feels in control. But if Hancock is right, that story falls apart. It gets messier, older, and more mysterious. We might be the second or third act, standing on the ruins of something lost. That's not just history, it's psychological. Yes, academia says no, but the public? Millions say, hold on, what if? Because when someone tells you not to peek behind the curtain, what's the first thing you want to do? The pyramids aren't just ancient stones, they're puzzles, challenges, and messages that refuse to be ignored. Whether you buy Hancock's theory or not, his work forces us to question everything we think we know about human history. The pyramids speak across millennia, urging us to look deeper, think bigger, and stay curious. They remind us that history isn't fixed. It's a story still unfolding. And maybe, just maybe, the greatest mysteries of our past hold the keys to our future, if only we're willing to listen. We'd love to hear what you think of this video. Drop your comments below and subscribe to the channel for more uploads.